This is University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts.
Hey podcasters, my name is Lauren Lee. I'm a production manager for UC3P.
And I'm David Raban, the publisher.
And you're tuned in to the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts.
Today, we have the second part in our Speechless miniseries. Our host and UC3P Live Events Director, Julian Lake, speaks with students from Hong Kong and Taiwan on issues of underrepresentation, censorship, and political oppression abroad.
Before we get into the episode, remember to subscribe to UC3P and our other podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. We're now publishing on Tuesdays and Fridays, so you won't want to miss all of our fantastic content. So without further ado...
Wait! I wanted to note that this discussion was recorded last year before we had mastered all of our recording processes. For that reason, the audio quality is not as good as we'd like it to be. Rest assured, we take your listenership seriously, and I promise that our future episodes will sound and be the best.
Okay, nobody wants to hear from you anymore, David.
Ain't that the truth?
Let's get straight into it. Woo.
Today, I'm joined by Kelly, Sean, and Rosemary, three University of Chicago students from Hong Kong and Taiwan, who are here to share some of their experiences living in each respective country, their relationship with China, and its relationship with each country. Everyone, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Happy to be here.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well.
So I wanted to start out with a little bit of history. Rosemary, you're from Hong Kong. Tell us a little bit about the relationship between China and Hong Kong and how it is today.
Okay, so this is about 150, 200 years ago. Hong Kong was colonized by the British Empire after the Opium Wars, and Hong Kong was basically ceded to the British Empire basically as part of reparations for warfare and for damages caused to the British Empire in this war. That was Hong Kong Island was first, and then the new territories, which is physically linked to the greater mainland China, was also ceded. Well, actually, it was rented out to the British Empire for 99 years. And so Hong Kong was basically colonized for a good part of the 18th, 19th, 20th century. And we can go into how the British colonial empire sort of built a system where Hong Kongers felt increasingly sort of separated from an ethnically Chinese identity. But in 1997, as part of sort of decolonization movements around the world, Hong Kong was given back to China, even though I would say that term itself is a little bit fraught. And Hong Kong has been part of China as a special administrative region since then. And technically speaking, until 2046, I believe, Hong Kong is supposed to still retain its special rights like freedom of speech, our own constitution called the Basic Law. Until then, under this Chinese policy called one country, two systems.
Fantastic, thank you. And Sean, would you like to give us a equally brief rendition of Taiwan's relationship with China, a little bit of past and the present?
Yeah, sure. I guess I'm not an expert in this particular area, but there was a civil war in 1911, and then following that, there was change of leadership throughout China for quite a while, and then eventually, what's known as the KMT, the Kuomintang, they took over. I think this was during the 1920s or something, and then there was a rising starting in the Shanghai area of some intellectuals who led the Communist Party, and initially they were faltering or they had struggle rising up, but eventually they garnered enough support, particularly from rural regions, whereas the KMT, the Kuomintang, was seen as primarily elitist. And then just throughout the series of events in the 1930s with the Japanese occupation, the war kind of continued, but there was also the intervention from Japan, and it was a mess. And then after the war ended and Japan was defeated, the Chinese Civil War kind of officially resumed, and at that point, the Communist Party has garnered a lot of support, and they had a huge number of advantages, and basically pushed the KMT back, and they receded to Taiwan, where they kept the base, and it was under the dictatorship of the Kuomintang under Chiang Kai-shek. And then following that, I guess the next major significant event which shapes like the identity today is the One China policy, like the consensus in 1992, whereby there was just an agreement between Taiwan and China, whereby there's one China, but there are two different interpretations of it, whether it's under the government of the Republic of China, which is Taiwan, or the PRC, which is led by the Communist Party. Oh, just to clarify, the consensus was done under the KMT. So that's why there's now an identity crisis in Taiwan, whereby the DPP, or the Democratic Progressive Party, disagrees with that position.
Okay, thank you. Over the course of your lifetimes, how have you each seen mainland China's influence, the government of Beijing, affect the political expression in your respective countries?
I mean, economic policy-wise, there's been a concerted effort to move towards more, I think they would call it like a collaboration or sort of cooperation with mainland authorities. There's been like an opening up Hong Kong mainland visas so that more mainlanders from mainland China can come down, do their shopping, and promote a kind of tourism that sees an influx of mainlanders every day down here and to Hong Kong. And it seems to me that there's been a growing sense of an attempt to homogenize Hong Kong culture in that way, and sort of like having the economic affect the cultural in that particular way. I mean, if you look at the protests, the Umbrella Revolution, there's been a sense of, okay, these mainlanders who have been coming down and sort of the language contact and cultural contact, and there's a sense of an erosion on what makes Hong Kong so unique.
And how about for Taiwan?
Okay, I'll go first. I mean, again, I wouldn't say I'm like the most suited to talk about this issue, considering I don't know, I feel like a lot of at least like students who go to American schools, like a lot of them come from like a different background from most Taiwanese people. I mean, like I grew up in an international school system, and I learned English as a kid. I learned Chinese first, but my English is far better. But I guess just as my first-hand experience, there hasn't been that much effect on my life in terms of Chinese suppression of speech, or I think in general for Taiwanese people, like I feel like it's different in Hong Kong, whereby there's an actual authority present building. I've been to Hong Kong. There's this big weird gray building that's just kind of like going over all of Hong Kong.
Yeah, the Chinese Bureau in Hong Kong. There's like a literal building in the middle of this business district that's also really close to the new government headquarters. Really, that's literally where the Chinese Bureau is. It's a space that the Chinese Bureau occupies, and technically speaking, the PRC's armies are stationed there. And so you can see how like that building and that sort of site is so, let's say, problematic, but also horrifying for a lot of Hong Kongers. Like if you look back at like the 1997 sort of pictures of literal Chinese troops coming in with their tanks, I think that made a really huge impression on Hong Kongers. Just to clarify, I think it's important for me to note that I was born a year before the handover. I was born in 96. My sister was born in 97. Literally, I'm qualified for a BNO, a British national's third-class citizenship from the UK now, whereas my sister doesn't. So I feel like I think our people our age have a more concrete sense of what it means to have been in that particular space in Hong Kong, to have been a colonized people, whereas I think the younger, sort of people who are currently in middle school or in kindergarten don't have much of a sense of having been colonized, or like this sense of the British Empire being the governing sort of structure of daily life in Hong Kong. And I mean, I went to local schools my entire life, even though again, there's a sense as a remainder, I guess, from the British colonial empire, which is that English is tied with and sort of power and prestige, and that's why my English is far better than my Cantonese. Again, there's the politics there, and sort of a sense of a globalized sort of capitalism makes me a person who's been sort of interpolated between a colonial empire and then you have the Chinese government, a much more assimilated subject than the average Hong Konger, I guess is what I want to say.
I see. Kelly?
For me, I grew up in Taiwan, and I went to a local school for elementary school and didn't really start learning English till middle school. And just as a normal Taiwanese, when I was a kid, I did not feel, I would say, any pressure from the Beijing government. We have a democratic system. We elect our own presidents. The big picture of China controlling politically Taiwan hasn't really been like entering my mind until I've become older and I start to learn history. I guess I started to notice this kind of political restriction when I was watching Olympics when I was little. And then I saw that Taiwan is not represented as Taiwan, but rather Chinese Taipei. And I started to wonder, like, why? We have our own political system, but why are we not presented as the way that we should be? Since then that I start to, like, become more aware of this issue.
Right. I think that that's a great transition into my next question, which is about identity. And how do you, as students who have lived through, as you said, Rosemary, the being colonized, how do you see yourselves as your international identity? Do you consider yourselves Chinese, Hong Kongers, Taiwanese, both, or something in between? Neither? I don't know. So tell me a little bit about how you see your identity in that respect.
I don't know. It's pretty clear that I wouldn't consider myself Chinese just because I didn't grow up in China. I'm not saying that Taiwan's an independent country or anything, but in any case, like I identify as I'm from Taiwan and I know the culture decently. I wouldn't say perfectly because, as I said, I grew up in my own little kind of bubble, which to some extent I regret. Growing up, there's definitely been like an identity divide in the country. Just people who support the KMT primarily and their policies, which is primarily based on that identity, and the Minjingdang or the DPP, which primarily supports like an independence of Taiwan. And I guess that's like the main difference. There's no like people wouldn't argue for like a complete cultural divide between like the two countries, just because a lot of people, after all, they moved from China to Taiwan, and even though they lived in Taiwan, it's not like we're completely separated from China. So yeah, I guess it's just whether or not we want the country to be independent.
I would consider myself as Taiwanese, but this identity only really came to me after, I guess, high school. Especially because when I'm little, my grandparents on my dad's side, they're a part of the group of KMT that came to Taiwan during and after the Civil War. So my grandparents lived their childhood in China. So I think heritage, speaking of heritage, I would say I'm Chinese, but considering that both of my parents and also we grew up in Taiwan, like I would say that I'm Taiwanese as an identity, but then heritage-wise, I would say it's Chinese.
I think what was really interesting for me to come to the States for my undergrad career is that I only felt ethnically Chinese or started embracing the identity of being ethnically Chinese, not like being a Hong Konger as like a sort of political or social or nationalities thing. In terms of ethnicity and in terms of heritage, I think that it's always been a very sort of problematized thing for me because in schools, in Hong Kong schools and local schools, you have to learn English, you have to learn Chinese, which is primarily taught in Cantonese, and you have to learn Mandarin. And so there's this sort of educational policy that's been pursued by the Hong Kong government since the handover that sort of looks at this sort of trilingualism, that you have to learn all of these things, all of these languages in order to embody what being from Hong Kong is. Which is also to say that nobody, like most of the Han Chinese in Hong Kong don't grow up speaking English or Mandarin in their households, right? So I think, again, it's a sort of sense of interpolation. There's a sense, for me specifically, that being from Hong Kong is to be in a space of a liminal non-identification of any of these countries or these nationalities per se. And so I think when I was in high school, when I was in middle school, I had this like sort of sense that I am from Hong Kong. There wasn't the sense that I was a Hong Konger in that sense. But after I came to the States, I had a much stronger sense of a sort of cultural continuity that my parents never really sort of